Friday the 13th, Hate, Kill, Repeat, an original novel by Jason Voorhees. Chapter 10. It may not be my place to say this, Ed, but... Van Stat's voice trailed off. Daimler watched the side of her face, feeling tense as he waited for her to say it. Whatever it turned out to be, he would naturally deny everything. He was functioning perfectly well and there was no problem at all. They would soon arrive in the Crystal Lake area and face the task of searching various motels and hotels. Daimler just wanted to get on with it. He didn't need an inquisition from an agent almost 2 decades his junior. The rest of her sentence didn't arrive. He surprised himself by deciding to push her. What, Mel? But what? I can't help feeling that your professional judgment is starting to waver. Let's just put it like that. Daimler swallowed. She was right, but to admit it would be a disaster. So he switched to defensive mode. I have no idea what you mean. I can smell the liquor, she said, sending a chill up his spine. Ed, I've smelt it all day. Why do you think I've insisted on driving? It's not because I enjoy notching up the miles. The car fell silent again. He wondered whether, if he continued to stare ahead of him, her accusation might somehow be forgotten, lost in the traffic. If you don't want to talk about it, I understand, but it's worrying me. After all, partners are supposed to depend on each other. My life could very well rest on you being together, and I'm not sure that the sentence didn't need a second half. Daimler cleared his throat. Look, Mel, it's like this. I'm under a lot of pressure with this case, he said. To tell the truth, I've been under a lot of pressure for some time now. You solve one case and along comes another. The better you are, the more police departments need your help. I find it real difficult to turn them down. To his surprise, Van Stat didn't give him a face full of venom, by way of reply. For perhaps the first time her eyes showed some kind of emotion. Daimler was unsure whether it was sympathy or pity. I can't imagine that scenario, she said. How do you say no when your assistance might prevent a killer from taking more lives? At the academy, they warned us about the dangers of becoming too involved with your work. It's very dangerous, as you apparently know. Daimler nodded. He looked down to see one of her hands resting on his right thigh. A small, imaginary electrical current shot through him. Van Stat seemed to realize what she was doing and withdrew the hands. Silence reigned once again. It's a fine line, said Daimler. Van Stat nodded. She had switched back to her cool, professional default setting. He looked at her quizzically, wondering what just happened. That was the first time she had ever touched him, since they initially shook hands. Halo had finally stopped running. She was lying on the ground, curled up into a fetal position, sobbing into both palms. She had dimly heard Trey's screams and knew only too well what they meant. He was gone, forever. Even though she knew that she couldn't have prevented his death, she remained racked with guilt. For all his imperfections, he had saved her life back there. She had rewarded him by blindly charging off into the woods. She wondered if Shona and Basket were safe. Everything had been such a blur when the man-child marched into their lives, that she had no idea what had happened to them. They could have been slain by the giants, or they might be hiding in the trees just like she is. The ground felt cold against the side of her face, but she cared little. She was concentrating on trying to control her tears and breathing, in order to make as little noise as possible. Surely, if she kept quiet, the chances of the man-child finding her were remote. She prayed also that the terrible screams in the campsite would have already drawn the police, who would come to hear their aid. In the back of her head there was a horrible fear that, even if the police did arrive, the man-child would be too much for them to handle. There was something about the way he moved, and particularly the way that his torn body had obviously been through numerous wars, which told Halo he was no longer human, if indeed he ever had been. Then it struck her, the legend of Jason Voorhees, the boy who drowned in Crystal Lake back in 1957. Various scare stories had been doing the rounds for as long as she had been alive, about how he was a grown man, a hateful demon, relentlessly seeking revenge for both his own death and that of his mother. Halo shuddered at the memory of the tale. His mother's head had been hacked off in 1979 by a camp counselor, who then herself was murdered. This couldn't really be Jason Voorhees, could it? He was supposed to wear precisely that kind of mask, though, wasn't he? These thoughts made her shake. She wanted to scream her brains loose, purge all the revulsion from her system. Instead, she had to keep it all in or die. It was a simple enough choice, but the pressure was starting to make her crazy. All around her, the woods stood silent, as if nothing untoward had happened. Still breathing too quickly, it was starting to make her feel faint. She looked around her. Thin traces of moonlight filtered down, illuminating the odd branch, bough, or bush. In some ways, the light was comforting. In others, it was a liability. The more light that surrounded her, the more chance there was of the madman closing in. The small glimpses of forest were also starting to play tricks with her head. At one point, she thought she saw that mask staring blankly down at her. In fact, though, it was 2 knotholes in a gnarled trunk. Slowly, the cold began to register. She had initially been shaking because of the fear. The effect was amplified by the frigid climate, away from the safety of the fire. Safety. What a joke. Then she remembered the Camaro, the battered shit heap that seemed in her mind to be a golden chariot of the gods. If she could get back to it, she might... No, it was Duke's car, and his keys were lying somewhere out among these trees, wherever he had been slaughtered. She needed to stay there and somehow live through the night. Then, by dawn, perhaps the man-child would have gone. Or she could find the keys, or the police would have taken care of everything. Perhaps. She pulled herself into a tighter ball. Then she heard the noises, a series of crackling thumps. At once the sound of snapping twigs and disturbed undergrowth. They were footsteps, and they were nearby. Worst of all, they were getting ever so closer. Bill Beller's mouth opened wide. His eyes shot through with shock. The knife had entered through the back of his head, the tip poking out through his mouth. The blood-slicked blade had wedged itself between 2 of his front teeth. This was not the way he had intended the evening to swing. Beller and his 2 colleagues, whom he referred to as Halverson and McCrimmon, had wandered out of the hotel's bar, through reception and out into the pleasantly lit gloom. Alcohol surged through their bloodstreams, although Beller seemed the worse for wear, as was generally the way. He jumped up onto the hotel's Phoenix fountain and momentarily swung from one of the giant bird's metallic wings, before Halverson and McCrimmon each grabbed a leg and persuaded him to come down. Not a moment too soon, either, as a burly security guard had seen him climbing and was about to reprimand all of them. As Beller hit the gravel once again, he looked at his hands, dismayed. Both palms were sore and reddened, the flesh on one having received an inch-long tear. "That thing's sharp," he said, rubbing his palms together, smearing blood between them. "I could sue those bastards." Gary Halverson, an excessively tall, gruff-looking man with an expertly trimmed mustache, slapped him on the back. "Damn straight! You should have the right to swing on that thing like a fucking crazy person, without coming to grief. I say we speak to Mr. Soames tonight. See if he'll represent your case, idiot." "You'll get nae sense out of Soames tonight," said James McCrimmon, a rotund, fair-haired Irish guy who had made the big move from Ireland to Philadelphia the previous year. "He was already on the brandy when we left." "When is he not on the brandy?" said Beller, studying his palms. "The guy keeps the stuff in his desk drawer. Thank God I'm so drunk I can't feel a thing." "A little bit of the demon weed should help too," said McCrimmon. "It's a healing thing, man. Natural shite." As the 3 men attempted to walk in straight lines out of the hotel's grounds, they lapsed into debate about exactly which one of them was carrying the dope. Confusion reigned until Halverson finally discovered the small, green package in his suit's breast pocket. They roared in celebration as Phoenix Heights' well-presented drive surrendered to the woods. "We should go down to the water," offered McCrimmon. "The lake? How far is it?" "I have no idea," said Beller, steadying himself against a tree, then wincing as the bark chafed his cut palm. "Let's just walk for a while and get some smoke happening, okay? I don't want to be too far from the hotel bar." "Aye, good point," said McCrimmon. The 3 of them were slowly navigating a well-trodden path, lit at regular intervals by lamps attached to the tops of tall poles. The buzzing of crickets filled the air. Fireflies darted tirelessly around the lights. "What a beautiful summer's night," said Beller. "We are lucky, drunken cats." At this, Halverson abruptly stopped walking. He was frowning. "Look, Bill," he said, "I think you're a cool guy and everything, but do you really have to say cats all the goddamn time?" Beller appeared confused. as though realizing only now that he used the expression. "Wow," he said. No problem." "Cool, just thanks," says Halverson, slapping Beller on the back so hard that the younger man took a few involuntary steps forward. "Now let's smoke some herb." Within minutes they located a spot just off the beaten track, which still enjoyed some illumination from nearby lamps. The crickets' clicking was louder here, but none of the men paid it much attention. They were too busy sitting in their triangle, fumbling with papers and their cigarette lighter that didn't work. "Fuck!" said Halverson, shaking the thing in his oversized hand and attempting once again to ignite it. Nothing happened. "Does no one else really have a lighter?" He watched as the other two men shook their heads. "Shit!" he growled, hurling the lighter to one side. "What does a guy have to do to get a smoke around here?" "You could ask two strangers for a light." This male voice did not belong to Beller, Halverson, or McCrimmon. They turned to see two people, cutting elegant silhouettes against the lamplights. "Hi there," said Halverson as they all placed one hand over their eyes, attempting to get a better view of the newcomers. They didn't look like cops. "Do you, have a cigarette lighter by any chance?" A cute giggle revealed that the male newcomer's companion was a lady. The strangers meandered over to join the drunkards, shadows playing over their faces until they were up close. Finally they sat down, smiling amiably as the triangle became a pentagon. "I think you guys are having a little smoke," said Penelope, waggling a finger with what the three men assumed to be mock reproach. "What is it?" "Just good herb, ma'am," said Beller, raising one eyebrow and smirking in a manner which he imagined made himself look desirable. "Just good herb." He looked at his colleagues to see that each of them was attempting to make eyes with the lady, whether her husband was watching or not. This, he realized, was not a good strategy if they were to gain fire from these people. He turned his attention to Norwood, who was sitting cross-legged, his hands on his knees. "Are you guys here on vacation?" "We surely are," said Penelope, gesturing back over her own shoulder. "We're staying at the Phoenix Heights Hotel, away back there." "So are we," Halverson told her, blowing her a little kiss. "Are you coming on to my wife, sir?" asked Norwood, still smiling. No, not at all," said Halverson hurriedly. He was clearly so drunk that he imagined that he could blow the kiss without anyone else noticing. "I mean, she is beautiful, but I'm sure she's more than happy with you, sir." "Indeed she is," said Norwood, fishing around in the inside pocket of his immaculate suit. "But we have an open relationship, gentlemen. If my wife chooses to sleep with any of you later on, she will do so with my blessing." 3 pairs of eyes goggled back at Norwood. "Now," he said, producing a lighter, "shall we all spark up?" "Can't think of a reason why not," said Halverson, taking the precious device from the older man. The conversation progressed awkwardly from there as the joint was constructed. Time and again the newcomers seemed far more interested in asking questions and answering any which the trio directed at them. A plume of smoke sailed out of Halverson's mouth after he took the first drag. Then he passed it to Norwood, who also partook. Penelope was walking slowly around the group, talking as she did so. At first, the 3 Intrax men didn't pay much attention. 2 of them were more interested in exactly when the joint might arrive, but her words slowly started to filter through. She had changed tone, no question. "How would you say this contributes to your lives, gentlemen?" she was asking. They exchanged surprised, worried glances. McCrimmon spluttered, then unleashed a rasping cough, holding the joint at arm's length away from his face. "It's a reasonable enough question, surely," said Norwood, not visibly affected by his own tokes. "Can't nobody answer it?" "Help us! Chill out!" shrugged Beller finally. "We all work hard." "It's hardly natural, though, is it?" said Penelope. "Or, to put it a different way, it's abusing a natural substance to cloud your own little brain." McCrimmon turned and handed Penelope the smoking joint. "I'm not being funny, love, but you should maybe try some." Penelope held it between her lips and drew the smoke in, then blew out. "You're right," she said. "It does relax a person. It's relaxed us, hasn't it, darling?" "Yes, Penelope, dear, it has indeed," her partner smiled. So, we'll kill you relatively quickly, she said. Keep the suffering short. The hazy smoke cloud that surrounded the trio seemed to act as a time buffer, so that her words took extra long to sink in. There was a muffled explosion. McCrimmon toppled forward and slammed into the dirt, the top half of his head destroyed by a single bullet. Penelope stood behind him, the barrel of her gun smoking steadily. The joint was still in her hand. Regarding the horrified survivors emotionlessly, she took her second draw on it. "Right," said Norwood, standing up and brushing himself down. Beller and Halverson saw that he was holding a knife, the 7 or 8 inch blade shining dully in this light. He gestured to Halverson. "Take this." Shocked into silence, Halverson took the offered knife by the handle, aware that Penelope was pointing the gun at him. "Stand behind your friend there," said Norwood. "Now stick the knife through his brain stem." Down there on the ground, Beller resembled a petrified statue. He couldn't move or speak. He could barely think about anything other than escape. Yet Penelope's gun could just as easily be turned on him as on Halverson. These people were obviously insane. Halverson was looking at Norwood. "Stick the knife through his brain stem," Norwood patiently repeated. "You'll gladly hand him this," said Penelope, holding up the joint. "What's the difference? Both interfere with the brain." "But that wouldn't kill him," protested Halverson, pointing at the spliff. "Ah," she sneered. "Short term, long term, whatever." She moved closer to Halverson and hefted the gun directly at his head. "Now do it, honey." Halverson was trembling just as Beller was. He raised the blade in his hand, his eyes wide fixed on the premature bald patch on the back of Beller's head. "Please," Beller managed to beg. "Just let us go. We've hardly seen your faces." "Sorry," said Norwood. "That changes nothing, I'm afraid. Our time is running out. You'll probably be 2 of our last converts. Wonder who'll play you in the movie, Another explosion. Halverson jerked away from the gun. One side of his head blackened and torn. He hit the ground with a gasp. "That's another thing about dope smokers," said Penelope, bending down to take the knife from Halverson's dead fingers. "It takes so long for them to complete the most menial task." She rammed the blade through the back of Beller's skull. Halo devoted every ounce of concentration to remaining still and silent. The footsteps emanated from the undergrowth directly behind her. She had no way of looking back over her shoulder without repositioning herself and making unwise noise. "He's found you," her paranoia warned. "He's just toying with you. Run while you still can. You were stupid to not run in the first place." Halo tensed her muscles, ready to tear off through the woods if the killer got too close. A hissing whisper broke the silence. She frowned and turned her head slightly, listening hard. It came again. "Halo!" This time she heard. The voice was easily recognizable. "Shona?" she whispered immediately, turning around and standing up, feeling her neglected ligaments creak. "Yeah, it's me, Halo." Shona let out as quiet a relieved exclamation as possible, as she lurched the remaining few feet to embrace her friend. They clutched each other, both breathing hard. The pungent smell of urine told Halo precisely how scared Shona had been. "Halo, he killed Trey. He killed him." "I know. I kinda saw it. Where's Basket?" "Don't know. I heard him yelling, 'Oh, Jesus Christ, who is that guy? Do you think he's still looking for us?'" Halo answered both questions with a pained shrug. "I think we should stay here and wait until dawn." Shona seemed horrified. "Dawn? That's about 8 or 9 hours away at the very least. My God, Halo, I'll either freeze to death or die of fright before dawn." "Okay, what do you suggest?" "We go back to campsite, get in the Camaro, and drive the fuck out. I would have done it already, but I didn't have the guts on my own." Halo rolled her eyes, as if 2 pregnant women would have any more of a chance against this bastard than one. Still, at least Shona's plan was proactive. People had spent years telling Halo she needed to be more proactive, to the point where she had to look the term up in school dictionary. Maybe they had a point. "What about the keys?" she asked Shona. "Screw the keys, I can hotwire." "You can?" "Sure, me and Basket have stolen a car or two." Halo was about to give Shona the third degree for both stealing cars and not telling her about it. When priorities gripped her once again, she merely nodded. "Fine, we'll try it." The women each took a step back and bleakly surveyed the surrounding panorama of gray and black smudges. Halo rubbed her upper arms. "Which way? I'm lost." Shona was concentrating hard. She pointed behind Halo. "That way. I'm pretty sure. It ain't far." Halo swallowed hard. "Okay, then. You'd better be right about being able to hotwire, though." "Honey, we've done plenty of 'em. Where else do you think we get money? Let's go." Halo felt as though the woods had tightened like a stricken heart muscle. Overhanging branches seemed designed to ensnare them and snatch flesh, while mangled roots did their utmost to trip them. Shona walked ahead, acting as a guinea pig for noisy twigs or obstacles, which Halo then did her best to avoid. The pair regularly stopped in their tracks and cocked ears, listening out for irregularities in the woodland soundscape. None came. As they drew closer to what Shona assured her was the campsite clearing, Halo felt thrilled by the thought of escape, terrified by the idea of bumping into the fiend again, and nauseous at the prospect of seeing dead loved ones. Further along whichever twisted track they were negotiating, Shona finally turned to Halo. "We're here. This is the campsite." Halo took a step to one side, attempting to look past Shona. She winced as something crunched underfoot. They froze like prey and didn't move again until they were convinced that the darkness offered no danger. Over Shona's shoulder was indeed the campsite. The moon illuminated it dimly. Halo shuddered as her eye began to discern the jagged outline of something burnt in the clearing's center. Knowing these to be the remains of her dead boyfriend, she wrenched her gaze away. "Let's walk across," said Shona. "The car's on the other side." Halo closed her eyes and shook her head decisively. "I can't walk across there. Trey's there. Duke, too, or part of—" She found the sentence too horrible to finish. For a few seconds, the reality of the situation was vivid to Halo, like a picture coming into focus. Duke's head had been cut off and Trey had been burned alive. Only God knew what terrible fate had befallen Basket. She hurriedly shook off these thoughts. They were too big for her to take in. Not yet. If they ever got home, she might be able to start dealing with this stuff. As much as it went against her nature, it was time to concentrate on their own lives. All four of them, she thought, snaking a protective hand across her belly. "But the trees are hard to walk through," Shona was saying, her voice barely audible. "It'll take too long." "How do you know the killer's not sitting in that clearing waiting for us? How much of it can we see?" said Halo. Halo saw the silhouette of Shona's hand reaching up to clasp her own mouth. She clearly hadn't considered this possibility. They stood at the campsite's perimeter for some time, peering through the half-darkness. Halo felt even more vulnerable than she had, when curled up back there in the undergrowth. At least she'd had cover. Maybe being proactive wasn't always the way to go. A compromise struck her. "Why don't we just walk around the edge, Shona?" she whispered. Shona thought about this for a moment. Then she completed the shadowy nod. The women stepped cautiously out onto the clearing's edge. They looked at each other nervously, then began to make their way around the perimeter. Halo could smell charred flesh. She stopped in her tracks and clasped one hand over her eyes. Hot tears dribbled through and over her fingers. Shona's face was a strange mixture of sympathy and desperation. "Halo, shush," she whispered. "I know how you feel, but we have to be as quiet as we can and move fast." Halo wiped her eyes and took a deep breath. Shona grabbed her hand and guided her along. Soon they were on the opposite side of the clearing. Something moved in the trees above them, a heavy rustle. They looked upwards, their faces ashen and shocked. Birds exploded through the branches and out into the air. Halo clutched her chest. She could swear that her heart was going to burst loose. Shona tightened the grip on her hand and dragged her along beside her. "There's the car," she said. "There it is." Halo managed a half smile as they walked side by side heading toward the vehicle. They could see the Camaro's profile no more than 10 feet away on the dirt track, just off the clearing. As clouds shifted, the moonlight intensified, revealing the dim outline of a man. Jason's mask glinted like a warning beacon. He was standing in front of the Camaro, his wedge-like feet planted shoulder-width apart, looking straight at them. Halo jumped twice, firstly at the side of him, secondly because Shona had broken the silence with an ear-splitting scream. She spoke in a high-pitched babble. "Jesus Christ, run like hell along that fucking road!" Shona broke into a sprint, heading toward the dirt road. Halo immediately followed suit, more scared than she had ever been. In retrospect, all those nights when Trey had beaten on her resembled walks in the park. Jason scanned the women's progress as they ran. Finally, he strode away from the Camaro, following them along the road. Something sharp glistened in one of his fists. Melissa Van Stat's head craned back, allowing Ed Daimler to bury his face in her neck, covering it with slow kisses. Her breathing rate increased, her fingernails scratching at his chest through the material of his shirt. They were in the back of the car, pawing at each other without any regard for who might see them. The truck stop was almost empty, save for a couple of juggernauts. Steam from a trucker's coffee flask curled up through one of the windows. The two FBI agents were paying no attention to their surroundings. Passion had detonated. All they could think about was scratching their collective itch. Daimler hurriedly unbuttoned the top 3 buttons of his colleague's shirt, then ripped the rest. The tiny plastic disc hurtled through the air in various directions, clacking off the Lincoln's windows. He kissed her hungrily, then slid his mouth down to her breast, which heaved out of the bra he'd been eyeing all day. She gasped, clutching the sides of his head. It seemed she was losing control of herself. Good. All Daimler could think about was her. Fuck the case, fuck everything else in the world, and most importantly, fuck her. With one spare hand, he undid his pants, easing them down. Then he set about removing the lower half of her suit. "Oh yeah," she said, opening her eyes. "Take 'em off, I want it." She lifted her well-defined legs into the air, the pads of her feet curling against the roof. Daimler couldn't wait any longer. Tearing off her black G-string, he fell into the sweetest, most mind-blowing haze he had ever known. The car phone's loud ring snapped Daimler back to reality. He'd been staring out of the window, mesmerized by the white lines that flashed to one side of the Lincoln. His eyes darted around as he cursed to himself. For 1 second there, he'd been living that scene. He crossed one leg over the other in an attempt to hide the evidence. Van Stat, still at the wheel, was staring at him. "You gonna answer that?" He held the bulky phone next to his head, trying to screw his professional head back on. "Daimler." He listened for a whole minute. Van Stat occasionally glanced over, trying to read his expression. He gave her no clues. "Great," he finally said. "Fax the pictures and profiles over now, and fax another copy to the sheriff's department at Crystal Lake." As he deactivated the phone, a grim smile split his face. "There was saliva inside Catherine Banks's mouth," he said. "Dunphy ran a DNA test, and he's got a 95% positive ID." "Who is it?" "A female. Name of Penelope Thawn. Originally Stanton. She's married, Mel." Van Stat took a triumphant fist. "I knew it!" Alrighty, good people of N-Tracks, just to let you know that Ballroom B will be ready shortly. Apparently there was some problem with the preparation. Typical, huh? The big, jovial man was the mass of broken blood vessels on his nose was Kerry Carson, the N-Tracks bigwig who had assumed Larry Brunkenheim's party hosting duties. Rumors put it down to him having sloped off with a hot blonde. So now Kerry Carson was not only playing host, but master of ceremonies as well. Tom Sheridan felt his surroundings shift, as though he was momentarily underwater. He wasn't a great drinker at the best of times, but he had sunk several beers. Anything to numb the growing dread he was feeling. It had been a while since he had suffered one of his panic attacks, at least 2 years back in a Chicago shopping mall. But anxiety was, for some reason, beginning to well up inside of him. It was the feeling that something absolutely terrible was going to happen, even though he had no idea what. Perhaps it was Greg, he told himself. There was a real confrontation brewing between the two of them, despite his attempts to defuse it earlier in the evening. Yes, that's all it was, a tightening of the guts, preparing for conflict. The fight-or-flight impulse, in advance. April slapped one palm on his right shoulder in order to steady herself. "You drunk, April?" he asked. "No, just a little tired." Great, he thought, another classic April Mather performance coming right up. The world thrashed up and down, whipping itself into a blur of greens, blacks, and golden yellows. The latter color was provided by the lamps which lined the track. As she ran, Halo's heart seemed to thump her under the chin. Shona ran ahead. The two of them had been running for a straight 10 minutes, aiming simply to cover maximum ground. The last time they dared to pause and look behind them had been about 2 minutes into this insane sprint. Halo shuddered as she remembered gazing back along the track and seeing that mask as the psycho walked into sight around a bend. There was no real urgency in his stride, but his body language bled determination. She and Shona knew that this bastard wouldn't rest until both of them were well and dead. Halo thought there must be at least half a mile between them. Then it happened. One moment Shona was sprinting ahead of Halo. The next she was screaming in agony as she piled forward into the dirt. Halo narrowly escaped running directly into her friend. Halo saw that Shona had tripped over a rock that jutted cruelly out of the ground. For a split second she couldn't resist gazing back along the shaded track. It stretched back a good distance, and there was no sign of their hunter. Shona was clutching her right calf with both hands, face distorted, teeth shining white. "Please don't be broken! Please don't be broken!" "You haven't broken your leg, Shona. That can't have happened. Come on, we've got to keep going." She grasped her friend's armpits, hauling her upwards. "Oh, fuck," said Shona, saliva dripping onto her t-shirt. "That fucking hurts." "Lean on me," said Halo. "We've got to move until we find help." "I don't know how far I can move." Shona cautiously tried to take a few paces as Halo moved anxiously beside her, then screwed her face up again. "Fuck, I must have pulled a muscle." She turned to face Halo, making direct eye contact. "In these kinds of situations, I know that I'm supposed to tell you to go ahead and save yourself. Well, please don't do that, girl. I don't want to die." "I won't leave you," Halo insisted, "but we can't just stand here." The trail behind them remained static, no movement. She fully expected the relentless freak to stalk into view. Being sure to maintain her grip on Shona, she looked around them. This wretched track was flanked by much the same dense greenery as they had seen everywhere else. Then something caught Halo's eye, a yellow glow in the near distance. It was so faint that Halo initially thought it might be a torch, but it wasn't moving. With her free arm, she pointed. "Look!" "What do you think that is?" breathed Shona. "I don't know," said Halo, "but it's not on this damn path. We need to get off. Maybe that's a house. We could use the phone." "Let's go. I can do this." Halo practically dragged her friend with her. Shona kept up the pace, her brow dripping sweat. They headed directly toward the light, leaving the track and experiencing the now familiar assault of wicked branches and leaves. "How you doing?" she asked Shona. "My God, you're—" She stopped herself. "My what?" "Your baby." "Oh, don't worry about that right now." If Halo's face was not being lashed, she would have thrown her friend a puzzled frown. As it was, she ignored the comment and continued her efforts to support half of Shona's weight, while hauling her through the trees. She felt exhausted, but had no intention of allowing this to stop her. They had to get out of here alive. For a second, she wondered about her own child, then told herself that a little running wasn't about to harm it. Her thoughts turned unwillingly to the maniac. Would he show mercy if he knew that she were pregnant? That they were both pregnant? Might be worth trying if it came down to the wire. The yellow light steadily grew closer. They would soon be there, wherever that might be. Melissa Van Stad almost managed to chuckle. "Have you used one of those machines before, Ed?" They were in the forecourt of another gas station. She paced up and down by the Lincoln while her colleague knelt outside the right-hand door, his upper half disappearing inside. Every few seconds he uttered a new, frustrated profanity. "I said," began Van Stat. At this, Daimler withdrew his head from the vehicle. His face shone with perspiration, even though the temperature had dropped considerably. "I heard what you said, Mel. I can use a fax machine, yes. It's installing the damn thing, that's the motherfucker." His head dropped back out of sight. "But no thanks to you, I think I've done it." Van Stat rolled her eyes and folded her arms, leaning back against the car. "Great. Now let's see what these people look like." A window. That's where the light had been coming from, Halo realized, with something approaching relief. They were approaching a small log cabin. "That looks good," said Shona. Her voice shot through with more than a little hysteria. "Am I imagining things, or does that look good?" "It does. But is anyone home? There's only one little light on." "I couldn't care less whether anyone's home or not, as long as there's a phone in there." "Let's not get too excited," said Halo. Inside, however, she couldn't help but hope. The green tangle of the woods reluctantly freed the pair, and they stumbled across open grassy ground. "Hey," said Shauna as they drew near. "Isn't that the front door? Isn't it open?" The cabin and its surroundings were bathed in light from some new source. Halo involuntarily covered her pained eyes, causing Shona to slip over. Halo bent down to help her, then Shona screamed, pointing away from the cabin. Halo squinted over across the grass to see what looked like a corpse. As she grew accustomed to the light, she saw that the poor bastard was once a cop. Was his head missing? No, it seemed to have rammed down onto his body, into his body. Flies had gathered, crawling over the discolored flesh. Halo felt sick. "Oh, sweet Jesus," said Shona as Halo helped her to her feet. "I think there's another one." 2 feet poked out of the open cabin door, their owner out of sight inside. Shona lowered her voice. "What if he's in there? What if he's somehow got here first and is in there waiting for us?" "That's impossible. We ran like crazy and he was walking. I'm no expert, but that body looks like it's been there a while. Now let's get inside, girl." As they slowly made their way toward the front door, Halo spied the security lamp, which had been activated, revealing the bodies. The corpse in the doorway came into view, a 50-something man lying flat on his back in fishing garb. A rod lay beside him in 2 pieces. What really drew the pair's attention, however, was a circular saw that sat upon his chest, half of the blade clearly buried inside him. His face was purple. Halo couldn't hold the vomit down any longer. Twisting herself away from Shona, who grabbed the front door's frame, she bent double and emptied her stomach. As she recovered, tears stinging her eyes, Shona followed suit. "We've got to get inside," Halo said. "Come on, we've just got to step over him." Shona leaned on Halo once again, and they stepped awkwardly over the body and into the cabin's gloom. They stood directly over the corpse. Some insane part of Halo's imagination half expected those eyes to open and the saw to start revving. The light they originally saw had come from one of the rear rooms, and it was no good to them right now. The room they were entering was lit only by the security light outside. Whole sections of it were steeped in darkness. "Where's the light switch?" asked Shona, searching the wall with an urgency bordering on blind panic. Halo ran her hand along the wall behind the front door. She found a switch and flicked it. Nothing happened. "Damn," she whispered, almost not wanting to tell Shona the bad news. Then the ceiling appeared, lit by intermittently flickering tubes of light, which eventually solidified, revealing the room entirely. Halo was relieved to see that they were the only people there, aside from their dead friend, of course. Shona used various items of furniture as props in order to negotiate her way around the room. "Where's the fucking phone?" Halo looked first at the open front door, then the body. She took in a deep breath, positioned herself behind the corpse, and stooped over it. "What are you doing?" Shona was staring at her, momentarily distracted from her frenzied phone hunt. "We've got to get this door shut," said Halo. "Just ignore me for a moment, would you?" She bent down and gripped the corpse's hands. She had held dead hands before, her own mother's, when she lay there in the open coffin, for what remained of the Harlan family to inspect. She had looked so peaceful, but Halo knew there was nothing left inside. Those hands felt so cold. No doubt they were all the colder because Halo's father had failed to show at the funeral. Halo shivered as though the ice was traveling from the dead man's hands and into her bloodstream. She held them tight, then lifted the arms from the floor. They creaked like links of timber. Halo pulled them back over the corpse's head, stretching them until they were taut. Then she dug one foot onto the floor and attempted to wrench the body along the floor. At first it seemed to be glued to the wood below, but then it came loose. Halo growled as she yanked with all of her strength, trying to ignore sickening details like the mauve flesh wobbling on the man's face and the blood congealing on the buzzsaw's teeth. "I can't see a phone, Halo. No phone." "Keep looking, Shona." The corpse's feet were inside the cabin, but those big legs still blocked the doorway. Halo stopped pulling and let the corpse's arms slacken. She sucked in a deep breath and renewed her efforts, wincing as another ligament cracked. Was it hers or one of the fishermen's? Behind her, Shona was hobbling around the room's perimeter, peering down the walls. Still nothing. I don't fucking believe it. Halo, what a fucking hillbilly. Don't speak ill of the dead. Halo said this despite dearly wishing that this guy hadn't eaten so much during his life. Outside, the security light went off. Halo paused, looking out at the clearing, which was a monochrome landscape, splashed with only the occasional sliver of blue from the fluorescent lights. The security light must be on a timer, she figured. Come on, waits a while, then goes off if there's no further sign of movement, like an automatic traffic light. With one last heave, she dragged the corpse over to one side of the room. Dropping those hands with a sigh of relief, she walked back and kicked the fishing rod's halves out of the way. Then she grabbed the door. Was someone standing out there in the darkness? She could see someone. She blinked. There was only the same empty patch of land bordered by those damn trees. Halo shook her head and swung the door, clunking it shut. She saw the empty keyhole. She looked at the fisherman, feeling dread at the thought of having to rifle through his pockets. Then she saw the key hanging from a hook to the door's right side. Nothing in here, said Shona behind her frantically. I'll check the bedroom, if there is one. Damn hillbilly bastard. Her voice dwindled behind Halo as she left the room. Halo snatched the key from its hook and shoved it into the lock, twisting it. There was resistance and her heart sank. Then, with some determined jiggling, the key sank in another half-inch and the lock submitted. A satisfying thunk sounded. Still, thought Halo, would it be enough against Jason? Jason? She frowned at herself for having accepted that this was indeed Jason Voorhees. Yet, when she really came to think about it, he fitted every single description of the legendary killer. Hopefully, not including his inability to die. She turned and looked around the room, taking it all in properly for the first time. It was clearly designed for one occupant, as the rocking chair suggested. A heavy wooded dining table held one used coffee cup, a single plate, and other china items. A set of bookshelves ran along the west wall, displaying well over 100 dusty spines. A small, dormant fireplace occupied the east wall, while a tiny kitchenette had been clumsily installed into one back corner. The two windows were crisscrossed with bars. A couple of firm tugs on one suggested that they didn't open. It was a matter of security, she judged, to stop people precisely like them from breaking in. Not that such precautions had prevented the cabin's owner from dying a terrible, terrible death. Perhaps it was a bad idea to turn this place into a fortress. They were sitting ducks in here, if Jason could find them. Hopefully, they had given him the slip. She wondered whether there was a rear exit. "Halo!" yelled Shona, sounding alarmed. Halo flinched, almost having forgotten that she was not alone here. She ran to the back of the room, pulse pounding, and was faced with two doors. One hung open, revealing an empty bathroom. The light that had signaled them to the cabin was a single bulb, dangling naked. Halo grabbed the other door's handle and pushed. The bedroom was tiny, with one window, barred like the others. Shona stood wide-eyed by a cupboard, clutching what looked like a long, black metallic tube in one hand. As Halo calmed down and walked across the room to her friend, she saw that Shona was holding a double-barreled shotgun. She winked at Halo. "This could be useful." "This will definitely be useful." Daimler hefted the length of a glossy fax paper in one hand, staring intently at the two faces, which stared back at him. Beside him, Van Stat was backing the Lincoln into the parking lot of a compact, run-down motel named Sunny Climbs. They had reached the edge of Crystal Lake, and, on Daimler's insistence, we're gonna stop at every damn motel until we find both of them. Daimler looked again at Penelope and Norwood Thawn's faces, shaking his head. Such respectable-looking folk. The pair had married only 6 months ago. She was a socialite from a rich southern background, while Norwood had been a 6th-grade teacher until he was fired a month ago. According to reports, he had gone nuts, beating one boy in front of the rest of the class. The kid's crime? Blasphemy. The car's engine died. As Van Stat undid her seatbelt, he snuck in a quick glance at her breasts. Perk of the job. And mighty perky they were as well. They exited the vehicle and walked across the potholed concrete, which passed for the Sunny Climbs parking lot. Silence hung between them like a curtain. Daimler could tell that Van Stat considered this kind of hands-on, door-to-door investigation to be beneath the FBI agents of their caliber, but he didn't much care. Whatever got the job done was wholly appropriate as far as he was concerned. Besides, the Crystal Lake Sheriff's Department also had the Thawns mugshots, and would be conducting their own search. The noose was definitely tightening. Still, this was set to be one long night. Fax paper dangling from one hand, he yanked open the motel's front door. 5 minutes later, the pair was back out in the parking lot. Daimler marched back to the Lincoln, while Van Stat shook her head behind him, hands buried deep in the pockets of her long leather coat. "So how the hell does this thing work?" Shona held the weapon uncertainly, its polished barrels glinting like the tears that hugged her cheeks. Shortly after making her discovery, Shona had further noted that this room didn't have a phone either. She'd collapsed on the bed, her body racked with sobs. Halo hadn't known what to do, so she merely leant the shotgun against the wall and sat quietly beside Shona. It wasn't as though she felt that great herself. There came a point when each of them had to maintain their own reserves. Halo surprised herself with this last thought. Such self-preservation was usually alien to her. Shona was sitting up again, a certain degree of determination back in her eyes. She had clearly never handled a shotgun before, but then neither had Halo. "I don't even know if the damn thing's loaded, Halo," she said. "Just pull the trigger and hope for the best." "I guess so. How difficult can it be?" Shona leveled the shotgun across the room and cautiously snaked a finger inside the trigger guard. An imaginary light bulb appeared above her head. "Halo, why don't you take the buzzsaw from the dead guy?" Halo screwed her face up. Can't face yanking it out of him. It was bad enough holding his damn hands. She decided to change the subject. "What did you mean earlier," she asked, "when you said not to worry about the baby?" Shona looked at her in a matter-of-fact manner. "I'm not really pregnant, Halo." In any other circumstances, Halo would have been shocked. As it was, with their very lives threatened, a little bit of deception didn't seem so outrageous. Still, she was curious. "Why did you say you—" "Basket's been screwing around on me. I figured that if I told him I was pregnant, he might come to his senses and stop fucking other women." Halo's eyes widened. "Or he might have run a mile." "Oh, never. He's always talked about having a kid. Shona stopped as though realizing she was referring to her boyfriend in the past tense. "My God, I can't believe he's gone, Halo." She clasped her temples. Halo was listening, but not listening to Shona anymore. She was gazing over at the bedroom's single window. The curtains weren't entirely drawn. Through the gap, Halo could see that the security light was back on. "Stay here," she told Shona, who looked up at her alarmed, sensing the tone of her voice. "What's wrong?" "Nothing, I hope. But the light's back on, outside. It could be anything, a deer." Her words came out sounding a great deal more optimistic than she felt. "Or the cops," offered Shona. "They've got a man down out there after all." Halo nodded and left the room. Back in the living area, she realized that they should have kept the lights off and lit candles or something. Still, too late now. Someone or something was out there. Fear ran an icy finger up the length of her spine. She noticed something dark resting on the kitchenette's surface, appearing out of place beside the shiny cutlery. Darting over, she reached for it. Her hand came back grasping an 18-inch machete by the handle. It was an ugly blade, afflicted with rust, but patently still sharp enough to do the job. Tiny splinters present along its length suggested that the cabin's owner had used it to chop wood. The muscles in Halo's arms tensed with the effort of supporting its weight. She returned to the middle of the room and listened hard. Absolute silence. The sound of nothing was so intense that it almost seemed unnatural. Halo's guts told her that something bad was going to happen. Not even the comfort of clutching a fearsome weapon seemed to ease her dread. "Hey!" hissed a voice which made her jump half out of her skin, even though it clearly belonged to Shona. "Wait for me! I don't want to be alone in there!" Halo's friend was leaning against the back wall. The shotgun appeared huge against her small frame. Halo placed her forefinger against her lips, then to her right ear. Using the shotgun as a crutch, Shona made her way to Halo's side. Then they listened. Nothing. Nothing apart from the sound of Halo's heart beating a steadily rising rhythm. She became so conscious of it, she began to wonder why Shona didn't hear it too. No doubt she was probably listening to her own. Shona wiped her face and turned to Halo, about to speak. She was cut short by something banging hard against the other side of the door. Despite their best efforts, the women yelled, their nerves cranked too high to suppress the shock. Shona leveled the shotgun at the door, wormed her finger through the trigger guard, and stopped breathing. Halo crossed the floorboards and tugged desperately at a window latch. If Jason really was trying to get in through the front door, they would sure as hell need an alternative escape route. That shotgun mightn't even be loaded. "Who's there?" called Shona. Silence for endless, dragging seconds. A second impact broke the lock with a loud crack. Halo gasped as the door crashed inwards, revealing Basket standing in the doorway, wide-eyed and covered in blood. Unable to stop herself, Shona fired the shotgun. The noise punched the women's eardrums, while the recoil sent Shona stumbling back into the rocking chair. For a split second, Basket seemed suspended in midair by invisible wires. The blast sent him hurtling back a distance of 10 feet, landing on the grass. The top half of his head, they saw, had been removed by the buckshot's onslaught. Only a jerking jaw remained. A long, deep gash, no doubt rendered by Jason, ran diagonally from his left shoulder to his right hip. Shona lowered the shotgun and cupped one hand over her mouth, unblinking. She rocked back and forth in the chair. "I saw him, but I was already pulling the trigger," she told Halo, pleading to be understood. Halo nodded, but she was dumbstruck. She was struggling to think practically. "Let's get out of here, Shona. Right now. Don't even think about what just happened." Shona was pointing at the door, somehow managing to look even more appalled. Halo was about to repeat her instruction when she followed Shona's gaze. Jason Voorhees. His hulking frame entirely blocked the doorway. Shona shrieked as Jason entered the cabin. His tattered and charred clothing was splashed with blood, both faded and fresh. In his hand was a vicious-looking tent spike, which she guessed had been taken from their campsite. It looked as though it had been dipped in red paint. The killer's shoulders pumped, his breathing audible even through the mask. He remained a mere feet from the doorway, blocking his prey's exit. Jason looked first at Shona, who was struggling to her feet, wrestling frantically with the shotgun, and then slowly turned to regard Halo. The fluorescent lights rendered his eye holes impenetrable circles of black, and lent his mask an unholy glow. Time slowed. Halo gripped the machete's handle harder than she had ever held anything before. The women stood apart, forming a triangle with this maniac. He would have to choose which of them to attack first. Jason stood at one end of the dining table, Halo at the other. Her thought was eclipsed by another explosion, heralding Shona's second shot. The blast struck Jason dead center in the chest, driving him backwards out onto the porch. Despite holding little hope for success, Halo seized the end of the table and yanked it upward. Surrendering the china to gravity's pull, it smashed against the floorboards. When the table was vertical, Halo stood between its legs and pushed it over to the door, barricading Jason outside. The table was, after all, roughly the same size as the entrance, but it wasn't going to work, and she knew that. Jason shoved the table away from the door with phenomenal force, sending Halo flying across the room. She landed awkwardly, crying out as her lower back made equally raucous complaints. The machete was no longer in her hand. She had no idea where it had ended up. "Oh, fuck!" breathed Shona as Jason reappeared, tossing the table aside like a minor irritation. It hammered off a wall and landed on the floor, narrowly missing Halo. The shotgun hung in Shona's hands. Even she knew that there were only 2 barrels. Halo watched Jason striding furiously towards Shona. She made a decision for the first time in her life. She wasn't going to take this shit. No, she would fight back. She would show him. Trey was a bastard, but he didn't deserve to die. Neither did she, Duke, Basket, or Shona. She would show this murdering fuck. A glance to her left revealed that the machete lay within reach. In a second, its reassuring weight was back in her hand. Shona shrieked as Jason rounded on her, the tent spike held aloft in one fist. As Halo ran toward the maniac's right, every cell in her body blazed with fear and anger. She swung the machete with a grunt. To her amazement, it sunk lengthways across Jason's neck. "Jesus, have I cut his head off?" Shona shrieked again, this time with a hysterical jubilance. Thick black slime oozed from Jason's wound, and the tent spike clattered on the ground. His fist opened and closed erratically. Halo tried to pull the machete's blade out, but it stuck fast. She opted to release the handle to distance herself from Jason. The women stared at each other as Jason swayed, then slowly reached up to grab the embedded weapon. "Run like hell," said Halo, seeing in Shona's eyes that she would be up to the task, pulled muscle or not. Adrenaline was a great instant band-aid. The pair scrambled for the door. For a split second they were stuck in its mouth side by side, resembling dumb cartoon characters. Then they burst out into the open air like champagne corks, their lungs sucking in breaths that they had never expected to take. Jason's head jerked and twitched as he tugged the machete. It came loose. More black slime gathered at the neck wound, oozing its way over his shoulder. He turned the machete around in his hands, gazing intently down at it. He firmly gripped the handle with his right fist. Then he walked out of the door, leaving small black dots on the floorboards. Okay, this has been chapters 10 and 11 of Friday the 13th Hate, Kill, Repeat by Jason Arnott. Hope you guys are enjoying the story so far. I actually dig this one as much as I did Church of the Divine Psychopath. And this book is way better than Hell Lake. I think anything would be better than Hell Lake. Any book. I'm pretty sure. I think Green Eggs and Ham was better than Hell Lake. Anyways, if you haven't done so already, please subscribe. Click that like button. Drop me a comment. I'd love to hear from you guys. Click the bell so you always know when new chapters are dropping. Be sure to join our Facebook group. Go to facebook.com/groups/80slasherlibrarian. If you join up, I'm going to be doing small giveaways on there. I just had one recently where I gave away a couple Jason movies and also a Jason mask plush. Congratulations, Desmond and Chelsea from the Facebook group for being the winner and runner-up in that drawing. Also, next week I'll be doing the drawing for the 2-book giveaway. If you want to know how to enter it, please look up the video I uploaded called 500 Subscribers Double Book Giveaway Contest for details. And if you enter this contest, all you got to do is answer 5 trivia questions related to the Friday the 13th movie canon. That's all you got to do. I asked the questions in that video, answer it, you're entered in the drawing. And next week, all the correct answers, I'll take the names of those people, do a drawing. The winner is going to receive 2 of these rare Black Flame novels that I have narrated so far. Okay, until next time, this has been your friendly neighborhood 80s slasher librarian saying thanks for listening, and don't click that thumbs down button because
it's got a death curse!